Well, good evening, beautiful people of planet Earth. It's 7:23 p.m. on the 1st of October 2024, and I find myself a little bit bored. I thought about doing one of my trance drummings, but I'm a bit sick of only being told sappy, nonsensical stuff that I don't quite believe anyway. So there is that. It's my subconscious. It's a beautiful psychedelic dream from which I have to wake up and smell the hummus or the roses, as the case may be. So I've decided not to indulge in those kind of fantasies and deal with, reality babies. And I'm a little bit bored because my TV's died, and I normally in the evenings like to watch, quirky and unusual movies or TV shows on Netflix or Prime, and I could do that. I could watch that on my iPhone, but the smaller screen, it's not as enjoyable, and first world problems. So I've decided that instead of trying to watch TV on my iPhone screen, or opening myself up to discarnate beings who like to feed me lots of fairy stories, which I probably should write down one day. Wouldn't it be weird if they actually came true, though? That would be astonishing. I'll let you know if they come true. It would be very astonishing. But anyway, I'll probably just end up burning them one day when they don't come true, because it could go either way, people of Earth. It's the way of the psychedelic dreamer. I'm always swirling in infinity, spiraling up, spiraling down, climbing back up out of the rabbit hole, skating on thin ice, trying not to hit the wall, climb over the wall, keep running, keep dancing till I hit another wall, and on it goes and on it goes. Gets a little bit fraught sometimes. So I decided, instead of living in a kind of limboic state of melodrama and boredom, I would continue reading famous Chinese short stories. So this will be the third video, and the two stories that run back to back are kind of the opposites of each other. My lip's peeling, burnt my lip, and I had a lovely pumpkin soup for dinner. One is called Chastity, and the story that follows on from that is called Passion. Go figure. So, typical classic example of yin and yang. But anyway, I thought I'll continue reading for us, because what else have I got going on? I could be spinning wool. I could be, I don't know what else I could be doing. A myriad of things. But I'll read to you instead, and that will be a way to pass the time that for me is pleasurable and kind of interesting as well, learning old famous Chinese short stories. So we begin with it says number 5. I don't know why it's numbered number 5, but anyway, maybe it's the 5th story in the book. So we'll begin with Chastity. This is developed from a short anecdote in popular books of jokes and anecdotes. The chicken story is in the original. The anecdote tells how a widow, on the eve of receiving a memorial arch erected in her honour, was tempted by a servant, lost the arch, and hanged herself. Oh, but Jesus, that's a cheerful story for the evening, but never mind. I have chosen, so I'll have to run with that. Try not to hit the wall, am I right? Anyway, it's a human condition, hitting walls. Happens to everyone from time to time. Beyond Suzhou is a small town just between a range of tall blue hills, fairly denuded, and the beautiful Waishan Lake, fringed by marsh ground. A row of stone arches stands astride an old road. The site is common enough in Chinese villages, cities and towns. Looking like decorative gateways, they are monuments to men and women of the past, to scholars who achieved high honours, or to women famous for their virtue. These are the arches of chastity, requiring a license direct from the emperor, celebrating widows who had lost their husbands while young and who had remained faithful to their memory for life. Men admire such constancy, but how difficult it is, this story will show. "Come in, Mei Hua," shouted young Mrs. Wen to her daughter. "It is no way for a grown-up girl of your age to behave, standing around the street door." Mei Hua came in, hanging her head shamefacedly. She was an extraordinarily pretty girl, with gay red lips, white even teeth, and a peach blossom complexion. Frank, independent and stubborn, she was the type who could be produced only in the countryside. Although she hung her head and came in, her steps were reluctant and her heart still fluttered. "Other girls are looking," she said to her mother in self-defence, and then broke off. A company of soldiers was marching down their street, 70 or 80 of them. The narrow street echoed with the thump of feet on the pebble pavement. Women, as well as men, had come out of their houses to watch and speculate where they were going. The older women came outside and stood against the walls, but the younger ones stayed behind the door screens of latticed split bamboo, which were a wonderful device for seeing without being seen. But Mei Hua had gone outside the screen and stood on the raised stone curb outside her house, easily noticeable. The tall captain, bringing up the rear with an eye for a youthful feminine figure, had spotted her a few dozen steps away. When he passed, the young girl with the peach-coloured skin gave him a slow smile. He looked and marched on, but not without turning his head for a second look at the girl's pretty face. His brigade had come from Suzhou, some 30 miles south, to root out a gang of bandits who had been hiding in the Blue Hills and making increasingly daring raids on the neighbouring districts. In a small town like Hanchuang facilities for housing, the soldiers were limited. Several temples were available, but the officers would be billeted in homes where they could at least sleep in comfortable beds. The captain had this on his mind, and he could be excused if he turned his head to look at the girl and identify the house. Having provided for the soldiers, he appeared that afternoon at the girl's house and asked if he might impose on their hospitality. It was a house occupied by 2 widows, the girl's mother and grandmother, but he was unaware of this. He explained the situation. The campaign might last a couple of months, and he would be away most of the time. But when he was in town, he would appreciate it greatly if they could find a place for him to sleep. They exchanged names, and the captain found, to his surprise, that there was not a man in the house. The girl he had seen that morning was there, excited and waiting for her mother and grandmother to say yes. The grandmother was a wrinkled woman, about 60, wearing a black velvet band around her head. The mother, young Mrs. Wen, was tall and a little thin, still a pretty woman, somewhere around 35, with an unusually high, well-shaped nose and a small, sensitive mouth. She looked like a refined and mellowed version of the young girl, with her youthful vivacity toned down and her emotional fire subdued, but not submerged, and carefully guarded and nurtured. She had drawn a veil of impassivity over her face, and if there was a quiver of a smile when the captain saw her, her lips immediately stiffened. Her quick, intelligent eyes gave the captain the impression of a mystery that was worth fathoming. It was a slightly novel idea for this family of 3 generations of women to take in a strange man, but one look at the young officer made it easy for any feminine heart to entertain the idea. The captain was tall and slim, with broad shoulders, very regular features, and a mass of jet black hair. He was neither the burly, unlettered, spitting and loud swearing, swashbuckling type one often finds in the army, nor was he prim and stiff and propped up with an artificial dignity, as others were. A graduate of Peiyang Military Academy, his speech was cultured and his manners were well bred. His name was Li Sung, Sung being his personal name. I shall not bother you ladies for meals. All I need is a bed, a good place to wash up, and now and then a cup of tea. This is not much of a house for you, officer, said young Mrs. Wen, but if you don't mind it, we shall be glad to have you stay with us whenever you are in town. The house was shabby enough and a trifle dark. The furniture was genteel but bare. The woodwork was discoloured from over-scrubbing, but the house was clean, orderly and well managed. They could certainly provide a bamboo couch in the front hall, and Mei Wah would be sleeping in the inner courtyard with her mother. The presence of the grandmother would be guaranteed against any gossip. When the 2 widows saw the captain, their first thought was that here was a man for their Mei Wah who had already arrived at an age to be married or engaged. She was a striking beauty. She had her mother's well-shaped nose and quick eyes, but not her mother's refinement of features. She had many admirers, and she knew it. She was known to be a desirable girl of marriageable age. But there was a superstition about the unlucky males of this Wen family. There were already 2 widows in the family, for both the grandfather and the father had died shortly after marriage. Since it had happened twice, it could happen a 3rd time, and the man who was going to marry Mei Wah was practically planning suicide. As they had no property except this house, people were not interested. Young men interested in Mei Wah were always discouraged by their parents when the question of betrothing her was suggested, and so she had grown up to be a buxom girl of 19 and was still unspoken for. There was a great change in the house of these 3 women when Captain Li Sung came. He paid a great deal of attention to Mei Wah and enjoyed the women's company. He was courteous and respectful to the grandmother, and cavalierly charming to young Mrs. Wen. He was a good talker and in love showily jovial, entertaining, and exuberant. He brought into the house of the widows a manly voice and ringing laughter, such as they had not known for years. Certainly, they hoped he would remain forever. Back from the camp, the captain saw Mrs. Wen in the inner hall. There was a small bookcase in which stood an assortment of classics and literature. Some were very large volumes in old woodblock editions, boxed in faded blue cloth, and hardly seemed to be the reading for women. There were some cheap romances and dramas, and some children's books, and the collection was commonplace and undistinguished. Pointing to the volumes, he said to Mrs. Wen, "You have a fair collection of books." "Oh, look at them, if you like. They belong to my husband." "What about the children's books? There seem to be more volumes of these than one would expect in a home without children." The widow blushed a little. "I really had not much of an education, but I give lessons to small children and to young girls." It was quite evident. There was a copy of Girls' Analects, several copies of the classic Duties of Women by the woman historian Pan Chao of the 2nd century, and 3 or 4 copies of Models of Family Conduct by Sima Kwong. Just the kind of books used in the education of girls. "Is this how you make your living? It is amazing. I was wondering how you, mother and daughter-in-law, support yourselves." Mrs. Wen laughed. "Oh, one always manages. When mother and I were younger, we used to do embroidery. Now I give lessons at home. The girls come and go. The lessons are very irregular. Some last a few months, others a year or so. The families like to send their girls to me because they know I give them the right moral instruction, just what girls need to make good daughters-in-law." He was opening the large set, Collected Sayings of Chu Shi, a favourite book of Confucian moralists, but more philosophical than most, when Mrs. Wen said, "That belonged to my husband. It is not for us women. I told you I am not well educated. All a woman needs in the way of education is knowledge of the essentials, the duties of a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, and a daughter-in-law, and the principles of filial piety, obedience, chastity, and such. I'm sure the girls taught by you would be well instructed in those principles. Your husband must have been a strict Confucianist." The subject seemed painful to the widow, and she said nothing. Her conversation, which was a mixture of modesty and pride, and her youthful looks and easy friendliness, had produced a charming impression upon the captain. He was in love with her daughter, but he could see that the mother was the more refined and had in her the strength of patience, born of sorrow, and a true appreciation of the finer things which, by a happy balance, made her contented as she was. He had no idea, as yet, that the widows he was staying with had a unique position in the clan, and that a movement had been set on foot by their clansmen to obtain an arch of chastity for them. After his return from Lin Cheng, the captain discovered that there was a vegetable garden at the back of the house, entered through the kitchen. One morning, Mei Wah had gone out shopping and the captain did not see her. He asked where the grandmother was, although he was thinking about Mei Wah. I believe she is in the back garden. Come and see it, said Mrs. Wen. The garden was very spacious in proportion to the house. There were a few pear trees, some flowering shrubs, and rows of cabbages, leeks, and other vegetables. It was shut off by the walls of the neighbours' houses, but on the east a side door led to a narrow alley. By the side door there was a one-room structure that looked like a guardhouse, and beyond it was the chicken pen. The grandmother was sitting on an old wooden chair, enjoying the sun, and Mrs. Wen, dressed neatly in black, her hair set high at the temples in the fashion of those days, walked around the garden with the captain. On her face was a curious mixture of modesty and pride, which was enchanting, and there was a soft glow in her eyes. He was quite sure that she could have married again any time she wanted to. Do you take care of this garden all by yourself? No, replied his hostess. Old Chang does it. Who is Old Chang? He is our gardener. Sometimes when we have melons and cucumbers and cabbages for sale, he markets them for good cash. He is the most honest man I know. Pointing to the guardhouse, she said, he sleeps there. At that moment, the gardener appeared from the side door. He was bare to the waist, for it was summer, and his beautiful tanned muscles shone in the sun. He was about 40, and his queue was wound round his head in peasant fashion. He had the kind of honest face that is distinctly likeable in whatever station it appears. Moreover, it was free from worries, and his skin was fresh and firm. The mistress introduced Old Chang to the captain, for that was the familiar name by which the gardener was called. Going to the curbed well, he hauled up a bucket of water, and taking a gourd, drank some, pouring the remainder on his hands by way of washing them. The simplicity of it was charming to see. As he was drinking, and the sun shone on his clean, beautiful brawn, the captain saw his hostess' sensitive lips quiver. I do not know what I would do without him, said Mrs. Wen. He does not want any wages. He has nobody to support, and all he needs are his meals and a place to sleep. He says he does not see what he wants money for. When his mother was living, she used to stay with us, and he was such a good son. Now he is completely alone and without relatives. I think, just say he or she, his mother used to stay with him. She used to stay with us. Now he is completely alone and without relatives. I have never seen anyone so clean and honest and industrious. Last year I made him a jacket and had to persuade him to accept it. He does more for the family than he ever gets from us. After lunch, when the captain went back to the garden, Old Chang was fixing the chicken pen. Li Sung offered to help. Later he was amused to think that the chicken pen had so much to do with the future of Mrs. Wen, so significant are the little details of our life. He got to talking with the gardener about Mrs. Wen. What a lady, said Old Chang talkatively. If it were not for her, my mother would not have had such a comfortable and happy old age. They say Imperial Tutor Wen is going to get an Arch of Chastity for them. Old Mrs. Wen lost her husband when she was 20. Her only son got married to my lady. It is so long ago now, but I heard how he was combing his hair one morning and just fell dead on the floor. The young Mrs. Wen became a widow at the age of 18, and she was expecting a child too, but it was a girl. You would not want such a young woman to enter widowhood for life. It would be inhuman unless she had a son to live for and carry on the family name, and unless she chose it. But she did not. The old lady wanted to adopt a baby boy for her daughter-in-law to continue the ancestral altar fire. But you know how it is with families. Some thrive and multiply and have 6 or 7 sons at a stretch. Others just fizzle out. People say luck was running against the males of this family, and no one was willing to have his baby boy adopted by them. So my lady just kept the girl. I have seen Maiwa grow up into such a pretty young one. Captain, why don't you marry her? She will make a wonderful wife for any man able to support her. Li Sung smiled at the gardener's simplicity of manners. He did not have to have the gardener tell him about Maiwa's charms. What is this Arch of Chastity? Don't you know? The Hu family have the only chastity monument in town, and the Wen clansmen are a little jealous. They wrote Imperial Tutor Wen about these 2 widows of his own clan. The old widow has kept her widowhood already for 40 years. They say that the Imperial Tutor will petition the Emperor to have an Arch of Chastity erected in their honour. Is it true? Why should I joke with you, Captain? Is this something to be joked about, for a woman to be honoured by the Emperor himself? They say the Emperor usually grants 1,000 taels, taels, T-A-E-L-S, taels of silver, along with the permission for the arch. Then she will be rich and honoured, and she deserves it too. My lady is young and pretty, and many men would like to marry her. She has chosen to stay in the Wen family for the sake of the old mother-in-law, to serve her in her old age, rather than marry again and leave her alone. You can't help admiring her for that. That will be the reason for the monument. And then she hopes that when Maiwa marries, they will be able to keep the altar fire of her husband's ancestors. Such a lady. The captain came and went, although he was more interested in chasing after Maiwa than in chasing bandits. Maiwa loved Sung as though no other girl before her had ever loved, and Sung was quite captivated. The girl did not try to conceal her love and admiration for him. She told him what she admired in him and why. It might have been artifice with other girls the captain had known, but one can sense it when a girl is wholeheartedly sincere, and the captain could not help feeling flattered. She was childish, vivacious, and sometimes, frankly, mischievous. All this made her extremely charming to the captain. Their love was naturally made very clear to her elders by the girl's behaviour and by the captain's more restrained but equally obvious attitude. Since Li Sung was 27 and single, the grandmother was already convinced that this match was predestined. Every precaution was taken, of course, against any impropriety. The grandmother slept in the western room, and Mrs. Wen and her daughter slept in the eastern room of the inner court. As soon as supper was over, the door of the inner yard was bolted and Mrs. Wen further took the precaution of bolting her own chamber door, but the mother was deceiving herself. Li Sung sometimes stayed at the camp so that he could meet the girl outside. Mei Wa sometimes disappeared in the afternoon and came back late for supper. Such irregularities always coincided with the days when the captain was supposedly not in the city. Once she came home 2 hours after supper time, for it was July and the days were very long. Following a road out of town, Sung and Mei Wa went on a shaded path skirting a large pond which led directly to a wooded hillside. It was a glorious afternoon, and the sting of the noonday sun had cooled off, and there was a delightful breeze in the spruce forest where stood rocks covered with shining green moss. In the distance, beyond the pond and its green banks, lay the beautiful lake. With the captain by her side, life was complete for Mei Wa. They had already sworn to love each other forever. The girl told Sung how famous her mother was for her beauty in her youth, how many men had proposed to marry her, but she had refused, and Mei Wa added, strangely to the captain's ears, "If I were in her place, I would have remarried long ago." "Aren't you proud of your mother?" "Of course I am. It is that I think a woman ought to have a home with a man, not like this. Perhaps I heard so much talk about Confucian ideas at home that I am sick of them." Mei Wa was young. No example set by a sainted grandmother and a mother on her way to sainthood could shut out the spring in her young, girlish heart. "After all," said Sung, "it takes a virtuous woman to do what she has done." "What do you think a girl is for?" answered Mei Wa quickly and spiritedly. "To get married and have a home and have babies, isn't it? It could not have been easy for mother to lose father so young, especially because we are so poor. I cannot help admiring her for it. But what? I don't believe in the chastity arches." The captain roared. "When I grew older, I thought about this. Mother is an ambitious woman and very stern with herself. There is a sort of distinction in being a chaste widow, and I think mother rather gloried in it. I don't know why I am talking like this." Sung asked the girl about the Arch of Chastity, which the clan had been expecting for her mother and grandmother. "I am glad for mother," said Mei Wa, "but after we are married, we will be gone, and grandmother's health is so frail. What will she do with 1,000 taels, living all alone, with nothing to look forward to except another 20 years of lone confinement and glory until she dies like a sainted carcass?" Li Sung was much amused. "How are you going to tell a young girl with her keen love of life that she is wrong? She had shared and watched the loveless life of the house of 2 widows, and perhaps she knew what she was talking about." Suddenly realizing that the sun was setting behind the hills, she said, "Oh, Sung, I must run. I did not know it was this late." During the captain's next period of absence, something happened. Mrs. Wen had heard from neighbours that the lovers had been seen together in town, and once on the road leading to the wooded hillside west of the town. Nothing escaped the watchful eye of the mother. She questioned her daughter. Tearfully, the girl admitted her guilt and said the captain had promised to marry her. Mrs. Wen flew into a fearful rage. I never thought my own daughter would bring such disgrace to this house. Your grandmother and I have set an example to this town. Now you have sullied the name of the Wen family. How the neighbours will gloat over such a scandal when they find out. My own daughter. I am not ashamed, said Mei Wah, wiping her tears. No, I am not ashamed of loving him. I am of age to be married. If you do not like him, find me one good young man. Find me one. I am young and will not let myself rot in the loveless life of this house. As for you, mother, I do not see anything in the hollow life you call your virtuous widowhood. Young Mrs. Wen choked with surprise and bewilderment. What are you saying, girl? She gasped, reeling before her daughter's unexpected jab. Yes, said the girl. Mother, why don't you get married again? You are still young. May the lightning cut out your tongue. No one but a complete child could have hurled a truth like a bombshell in that naked, straightforward fashion. She had no idea how much she had hurt her mother, how deeply and unexpectedly her words had cut. The thought of the mother marrying again was horrible, shocking, unthinkable. I have taught you all these years. Girl, have you no sense of shame? Mrs. Wen broke down completely and cried aloud pitifully. It is strange how much a sentence, a phrase, a mere word can do at times. All the torments, I can't speak English anymore. All the torments she had endured and could tell nobody about for those long 19 years now came out in those bitter, salty tears. What had she not endured? And now her own daughter was laughing at her and taunting her years of sacrifice and self-denial whose price she alone knew. Not since Mrs. Wen was a little girl had she ever heard anyone question the virtue of a widow's chastity or the validity of her ideals. It was like questioning the sun. The idea of her remarrying was not really unthinkable, but truly unthought of for all those long years. It was a closed issue long ago. If she had ever had any idea of remarrying, she had pushed it rigidly out of her mind. It was truly unthought of until now. Mrs. Wen ceased to scold her daughter. She had crumbled into a heap of misery. Mei Wah, frightened, had not said another word, but the mother seemed to break completely under her daughter's taunt. What Mei Wah said about the emptiness of a widow's hard life was only too true. The mother buried her head in her hands upon the table and continued to weep. She let her mind drift. Mei Wah's happiness with the captain was real and convincing. If she had met such a young man when she was young, it was such confusion. Mrs. Wen decided that they had to wait till the captain returned to the house. He might be in the city now, and the girl might go to warn him or even run away with him. She locked Mei Wah in her room. When he returned 3 days later, Sung was greeted by Mrs. Wen alone, somewhat sullenly. Where is Mei Wah? She is all right. She is inside. Why doesn't she come out? I was waiting for that question, answered Mrs. Wen in a grim voice, her lips tightening. I thought you might be in the city, and wondering why she did not come to have a rendezvous with you. What rendezvous? Asked Sung in surprise. I came in only this morning. Don't pretend. I know all about it. Her tone came as near a restrained feminine anger as he had ever heard from her lips. There was again that curious mixture of modesty and pride which had so charmed him. The captain was silent. From the back of the house came Maiwa's voice, crying frantically. Let me out! Here I am, Sung! Save me, Sung! Let me out! She broke into a howl. What is all this? Sung shouted and dashed inside. He heard her pummeling the locked door and her pitiful crying. Young Mrs. Wen had followed him to the inside hall, and the grandmother had come out of her room. Walking slowly toward the captain, the old lady said with tears in her eyes, Young man, will you marry her? Sung's face dropped in surprise. He understood now. The girl inside kept crying, Sung, Sung, let me out. Of course I will marry her. Now will you open the door and let me talk to her? The door was opened and the girl came out and fell into the arms of the officer, crying, Take me away, Sung, take me away. Now it was the mother's turn to break down and cry. The captain apologized again and again and tried to comfort her, but it seemed that her crying had nothing to do with this, a thing which the captain could not understand at the time. He spoke as if he knew clearly where he stood. He was very sorry for what he had done, but he never had any other thought about marrying Maiwa. He had never had any other thought but marrying Maiwa. He took all the blame on himself. He craved their pardon. But here he was, ready to marry Maiwa, and he hoped to be their dutiful son-in-law. Maiwa sat there, shocking her elders by her happiness. Oh, bless. Now that the crisis was over, the match did not seem so bad after all. The captain's promise of marriage made it right with the family. The campaign against the bandits was soon over. Arrangements were made with the captain's family, and Maiwa was rather hurriedly married to her husband at Suchow. The human mind is one of the most unpredictable things in this universe. The short and rather tumultuous romance of Maiwa and the captain was ended, but it left a strange effect on Mrs. Wen. 3 months later, the grandmother died. The captain came up alone to help with the funeral arrangements. Mrs. Wen informed Li Sung that the granduncle of the clan had come to show her a letter from the imperial tutor saying that he would make the recommendation for the Chastity arch. It was almost a sure thing. The story had got about and excited the clansmen considerably, and now the whole clan seemed to have a vested interest in the two widows' chastity. Among the Wen family now, the two widows, living and dead, were already referred to as Chie Fu, Dame Chaste, a term of great honour. Curiously, Mrs. Wen told all this to her son-in-law without much enthusiasm, and at times even with a suggestion of doubt. Why, it is wonderful, said Li Sung, bubbling over. Aren't you excited? I don't know. How is Maiwa? Li Sung gave her the news, that they were already expecting a child, Mrs. Wen began to tremble. "Why did you wait to tell me? This is real news." "Oh, it is hardly so important as the honour of the arch to you, mother," said the captain. "The arch," Mrs. Wen exclaimed contemptuously. "Let us not talk about it." Li Sung was surprised at her indifference to such a rare honour. He recalled what his wife had said about another 20 years of lone confinement and glory. It was hard to believe that she herself would look at it that way. "Do you think I should accept it?" Mrs. Wen asked, abruptly returning to the topic. What a strange question. "It would be insane not to," Li Sung's voice trailed off as a doubt entered his mind. "Of course, after the arch is granted, your widowhood would be sacred, as it were, in the emperor's keeping." When the funeral was over, Mrs. Wen came back to her house alone. The front and back halls were still covered with hanging scrolls of condolence, and stretching across the centre of the hall was a white silk scroll, the present of the magistrate himself, with the 4 characters, "One door, 2 chaste." Living alone in that house, Mrs. Wen had plenty of time for thought of her future. As she looked ahead, she was a little frightened. Only a few months ago, her mother-in-law, her daughter, and the captain had filled this house with gay laughter. Too many things had happened, one after another. Mei Wa's romance and marriage, the grandmother's death, the sudden rise to a glorious but rather dreary height of fame, and the unborn child. Old Chang had been wonderful throughout the funeral ceremony, and now, seeing his mistress so sad, he came to be of even more help. He did the shopping in Mei Wa's place. He relieved Mrs. Wen of all household worries and of all things that had to do with the outside world, and was able to even bring home some income from the sale of vegetables. From her kitchen, she watched the faithful, honest gardener at work, and sometimes, in sheer loneliness, went out to the garden to talk with him. The garden was completely shut off, and no neighbours could see them. A sort of intimacy developed. But the grand uncle called, bringing 100 taels as a funeral gift from the imperial tutor. The granting of the monument and the 1,000 taels was now a practical certainty. When the grand uncle left, Mrs. Wen had a difficult decision to make, and she had to make it before it was too late. Old Chang congratulated her with all his heart. He was proud of his mistress and had never had any idea but that she would soon be a famous woman. Several times Mrs. Wen wanted to open the question, but how was a lady, a chaste widow at that, to propose to a man? Several times she went to the garden to discuss vegetables with him, but there were the blue sky and the white sun above, and her modesty and her long years of training prevented her from ever mentioning what was on her mind. She could not do it. Chang was so absolutely honest, so completely faithful. He never thought of her as a woman. He was desperate when it all happened. When a baby girl was born to Mei Wa and the captain, they came to show Mrs. Wen the new grandchild. She was thrilled to hold the pretty little baby, plump and white and warm, close to her breast, and crooned to her. She had not held a baby for so long, and she was so young to be a grandmother, which made her very happy. Meiwa, I'm so glad you are so happily married. You must be very proud of your child and your husband. There were tears in Meiwa's eyes. She thought her mother had become more human and had completely, truly forgiven her. But during the first day of their visit, Meiwa saw her mother sitting silently alone and caught a worried expression on her face. She was no longer the self-possessed, contented woman Meiwa had always known her to be. Then the captain learned the astounding news. Coming to the garden, the captain saw old Chang tilling the ground. To his great surprise, the gardener drew him to his sleeping quarters. On the gardener's face shone a strange light of happiness, excitement, and perplexity. Please tell me what to do, Captain. I am an uneducated man. What is it? Old Chang hesitated a second. It is my lady, he said. Is my mother-in-law in any trouble? No, but Captain, you alone can give me advice. I do not know what to do. Does it concern you too? Yes. You must tell me what the trouble is, what happened between you two when I am away. The gardener was slow of speech, unused to fine conversation. As he told the story, the captain could not believe his ears. Old Chang went on slowly and solemnly, and then the captain understood how the highly correct widow that his mother-in-law was had gone about her problem in the most devious way to suggest something which a young girl like Meiwa could do with a simple gesture or a kiss. The summer nights had been hot, and old Chang slept half-clothed on his mat. One night, the week before, he woke up to hear his lady calling, "Old Chang!" The declining moon was in the western sky, shining directly over his bed, and he saw his lady standing at the door. Hastily he got up and asked whether there was anything she wanted. "No," said Mrs. Wen. "You are indeed a heavy sleeper. I heard the chickens cackling and thought a mountain cat was stealing them." In order to reach the chicken pen, she had to pass old Chang's sleeping quarters. It must have been 3 o'clock in the morning. The grass was wet with dew. "Go back to bed," the widow said. "You may catch cold standing there without a jacket on." But old Chang insisted on seeing her to the kitchen door. Old Chang thought of the little wildcats that came from the mountains to prey on the poultry at night, but he never seemed to hear the chickens. He always slept soundly. The next day, Mrs. Wen said to him, "Close the pen well and see that nothing can get in there." "Don't worry," he said. This had never happened before, but on the third night it appeared that a wild cat got through the wire and made away with a black hen. Old Chang awakened when he felt someone covering him with a sheet, and his lady was shaking him. "What is the matter?" he asked as he sat up. "I saw a wild cat. He jumped over the wall and got away." Old Chang hastily threw on a jacket, and they examined the pen and found a big hole in the mesh. His lady pointed out to him where she had seen the wild cat. They did not see any footprints, but when they came to the spot they found, indeed, the black hen dead on the flower bed along the wall with a gory gash in its neck. Old Chang apologised for his carelessness, but the widow was kindness itself and said to him, "We have lost nothing. I can cook the chicken for supper tomorrow." "How is it that you are such a light sleeper?" Old Chang asked. "Oh, I often lie awake at night. I can hear the slightest noise, even in my sleep," replied Mrs. Wen. They went back to his room, but his lady remained at the door. He saw spots of blood on his lady's dress and fingertips. Throwing the dead hen to the floor, he poured some water for her to wash her hands. He asked her if she would like to have a cup of tea. She declined at first, but on second thought said she would. She was fully awake now and was not likely to go to sleep again. "Shall I bring it to the house?" Old Chang asked. "No," she said. "It is so beautiful out here." "I won't be a minute." "There is no hurry," said Mrs. Wen. She sat on his bed and felt the mat and the bare boards and the ragged sheets he had for a coverlet, and said to him, "Old Chang, I did not know that you have no decent coverlet. I will give you one tomorrow." The next day, when the bowl of chicken was served at supper, his lady reminded him again of the mountain cat. "Have you repaired the pen?" He said that he had, of course. "The same one may come tonight," she said. "How do you know?" "Why, he did not get what he wanted last night. He was too timid. He almost got the chicken, but dropped it when he got scared. He wants the chicken, and he knows where the chicken is. Then, if he is a sensible cat, he ought to come tonight. Isn't it clear?" "So I was determined," continued the gardener with his story, "to sit and watch for the cat, and told my lady not to bother. I turned the lamp low and brought out a stool behind the bush, with a heavy briar stick to cudgel the brains out of any mountain cat that dared show its paws in my garden. And the moon climbed to the zenith, and there was still no cat, and climbed down again, and there was still no cat. It was getting chilly, and I decided to turn in when I heard my lady's voice calling softly, 'Old Chang!' I turned and saw my lady in white approaching from the house like a fairy marcou. When she came close to me, she whispered to me, 'Have you seen anything?' 'Not a thing,' I replied. 'Let us wait in your room,' she said to me. It was the most beautiful night I ever had in my life. We two sitting there, me and my lady, when all the world was asleep and silent around us. She had given me this new bedsheet that morning. It was so white and new that I had not the heart to sit on it and crumple it. Huddled there, we looked at the silvery moonbeams coming through the window. It was as if we had known each other for a long, long time. We sat and talked, or rather my lady was talking most of the time, of all sorts of things, of the garden, of life and toil and sorrow and happiness of heart. She asked me about my past and how it was I was not married. I told her I could not afford it. "If you could afford it, would you get married?" Mrs. Wen asked him. "Of course I would," Old Chang replied. The widow looked rapt and dreamy and seemed unreal to the gardener, with the moonlight falling upon her pale face and her eyes bright like gems. Old Chang was almost frightened. "Are you real, or are you fairy marcou coming out in a white dress in the harvest moon?" he asked. "Old Chang," Don't be silly. Of course I am real. When she said that, she seemed more unreal to him, and her eyes were looking at him, and yet not looking at him. The gardener could not help looking at her. Don't look at me like that. Of course I am a woman. Touch me. She held out her arm. Old Chang touched it, and Mrs. Wen shivered. I'm very sorry. Have I frightened you? Asked the gardener, feeling apologetic. For a moment I thought you were truly fairy Maku coming out on a moonlight night like this. The widow chuckled, and old Chang felt relieved. Am I really as beautiful as that, Chang? She said. I wish it would always remain like this. Tell me, do you think that fairy Maku would love and marry as men and women do on earth? How do I know? Replied the honest Chang, still failing to catch the hint. I have never met fairy Maku. Then Mrs. Wen asked a question which bewildered the gardener. What would you do if you met her tonight? Would you make love to her? Would you prefer that I'm fairy Maku or that I am a woman? Lady, you are joking. How dare I? I am serious. Would you be happy if we lived always like this, like Mei Wah and the captain, as man and wife? Lady, I do not believe you. I do not have that luck. What about the Arch of Chastity? Never mind the Arch of Chastity. I want you. We can be happy together and live together till great old age. I do not care what the people say. I have had 20 years of widowhood, and that is enough for me. Let other women have it. And she kissed him. Captain, what am I to do? Old Chang cried in the same breath with which he finished the story. Who am I to stand in the emperor's way? But my lady says it is all right. She asked me to marry her now, or she would never be able to marry later on. Imagine my lady saying that. She said she would be happy with me and I could support her as we are now. Captain, what am I to do? The idea penetrated Li Sung's head very slowly, for he was bewildered at first and was intent on catching every syllable and nuance of the gardener's words. It was after some hard swallowing that he exclaimed, What to do, you idiot? Marry her. He carried the news in a flash to Mei Wah. I am so glad for mother, said Mei Wah, and then she added in a whisper to her husband, Mother must have killed the black hen herself. There ought to be an arch of chastity for men like Chang. Late that evening, after supper, the captain said to Mrs. Wen, Mother, I have been thinking. This baby girl of mine has been a great disappointment to you, I am sure. We do not know when we shall have a baby boy who would bear the name of Wen. Mrs. Wen looked up. The captain continued solemnly, looking steadily at the ground. I have been thinking. You must not laugh at me, Mother. Grandmother is dead, and you are lonely, living all alone. Chang is an honest man. If you will permit me to speak to him, I think he will be glad to adopt the Wen family name when he marries you. Mrs. Wen blushed all over. She began to say, Yes, the Wen family name, and dashed to her room. When her wedding to the gardener took place, which was a cruel disappointment to the Wen clansmen. You can never tell about a woman, the granduncle said. The end. The next story, as I delineated at the beginning of this video, is called Passion. You just see how long it goes because I'm very tired today, very, very weary. It's quite a long one, by the gods. Well, I'll get a drink of water and we'll soldier on. Just one moment. Oh, my goodness. The most celebrated love story in Chinese literature was written by the famous poet Yuan Chen. He wrote it down as a story which had happened to someone else, but it was clearly autobiographical. The dates, the events, the characters were too real and coincided too well with his own, and the writer's personal emotion was too deeply felt for it to be anything but an autobiographical account of his own romance. The thin disguise of the name Chang, which he gave to the lover in the story, did not deceive his friends, and the extraordinarily vivid story aroused a great deal of talk and curiosity. The author, who had become one of the two foremost poets of his day, was embarrassed, but he could not suppress the story or his feelings about it. And always the word Oriole in Zheng, which was a girl's name, slipped into his verse when it was not disguised as Shuang Wen, referring to the duplicated sounds in that name. The girl was his first love, but there were special reasons for his remembering it. The version here faithfully follows Yuan Chen's own story until the point where the lover, Yuan Chen himself, abandons the girl and proceeds to make ridiculous excuses for himself. He makes the lover compare in Zheng to the historic beauties who ruined empires and actually uses the word Yao Nie, evil spirit born to destroy men, on his abandoned sweetheart. Yuan also says that the lover's friends who heard of the story commended him for stopping a mistake in time. Yuan Chen, although a brilliant poet and later a high official, was not generally respected for his character. Many biographical details and poems of Yuan Chen make it certain that he was writing about himself. Among other things, I need only mention that his maternal aunt, also named Cheng, as in this story, ran into trouble with looting soldiers and was saved by the nephew. There is too much evidence to present here. In filling out the gaps in the original, I have depended upon Yuan Chen's own poems. 1. The original contains Ing Zheng's letter to her lover, which is considered a masterpiece, but omits the lover's letter to her. It merely says that the lover sent her a letter to explain his failure to return. I have taken lines from his Ku Chue Chue Tsu, poem severing relationships in ancient style, to fill in this important gap. Yuan Chen was actually casting suspicion on the girl's faithfulness to him. He was, in American terms, a heel. 2. The original gives Jing's poem inviting him to a rendezvous, but hides the poem he first wrote to her. I have taken some lines from his poem, Ku Yen Shi, about the floating petals, and so on. 3. The first paragraph about his sentiments in recalling the monastery bells 20 years ago is taken from his poem Chun Xiao, or Spring Morn. 4. The line about a smile that was half a smile and the recalling of perfume is taken from his poem, actually entitled On in Jing. 5. Was it in Yang? In Yang, probably. Chinese people watching this video are probably rolling around on the floor laughing at my terrible pronunciation. Well, I can't help it, can I? I'm white and stupid and ignorant. I've never been to China. I do like Chinese food though. It's a Jewish thing. No, I'm joking about it being a Jewish thing. But anyway, all the Jews in my audience will get that joke. What do we all do on Yom Kippur, am I right? Well, American Jews anyway. They like to order their Chinese takeout. Oh, I'll be in big trouble. I'll be in inter-cross-cultural trouble now, people of Earth. Do I look bothered? Bit of English for you there. Throw that in. Right. Flat out like a dead dingo's donger, mate. Let's be Australian now and get on with the story. 5. Some other material about the rendezvous is taken from his long autobiographical poem sent to Po Chu Yi, in which the whole episode is told as a dream fantasy, followed by an account of his marriage to the Wei girl. In Yang or In Jing or however the hell you pronounce it, in the original was a girl who was shy and restrained in public and did not talk much, but who was clear-headed and practical. I believe the presentation was true to life. The friend Yang Chu Yuan was a real person too, and appeared also in the original. So here I am, reading stories about other people's love lives, because I don't have one. Oh, smallest like violin. You ready? Delete, 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 delete. Love is a many splendid thing. And let's try not to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Anyway, we'll carry on. You just can't take it seriously, people of Earth. Sometimes you just gotta just be a little bit off centre and squidgy and weird. Right, let us begin. Are you ready? Whenever Yuan Chen stopped at an inn at Pucheng on his official travels, the sound of the nearby monastery bells, especially when heard in his bed at dawn, always touched him to the quick, made him feel young and romantic again. He was in his 40s, a conventionally happy husband, a popular poet, and a high official who had his many ups and downs. He should have been able to forget, or at least calmly reflect on, a love affair which happened so long ago. But he surprised himself. 20 years had passed, and the tolling of those monastery bells in the early hours presaging the break of dawn, their familiar pitch and rhythm, still evoked in him a mood of infinite sadness, awaked some deep hidden emotion, intimate as life itself, and a sense of the strange pathos and beauty of life which even his poetic pen could only suggest. As he lay in bed, he recalled the sight of the pale sky with its dim, shimmering stars, the suffocating emotions associated with it, the strong perfumes, and the vision of a smile that was half a smile on the face of the girl who was his first love. Yuan was then a young man of 22, on his way to seek literary honours at the capital. According to his own story, he had never fallen in love before and had never had an affair with a woman, for, as a brilliant and highly sensitive young man, he had set his mark high. He was not particularly jovial or sociable, and the common good-looking girls about whom his young friends raved left him untouched, although he confessed that when he saw a girl of distinguished looks or talent, he was deeply moved. In the days of the Tang Empire, scholars set out to the capital months or even half a year before the national examinations and took the chance to travel and see the country. His time was his own. When he passed Pucheng at the bend of the Yellow River, he stopped to see Yang, who was a schoolmate of his. Yang urged him to stop over, and he did. They often walked to the Puchiu, Puchiu temple about 3 miles east of the city, where the hillsides were covered with plum blossoms in winter. The weather was cold but crisp, sunny and dry. Here one obtained a view of the wide expanse of the river and the distant Taipo Mountains to the south, which rose on the other side. Yuan was so enamoured of the place that he made arrangements with the monastery to stay in one of the guest rooms provided for pilgrims. The temple had been built about 50 years before by the Empress Wu and was laid out on a grand scale with glazed yellow roofs and gilt decorations. It was large enough to accommodate over 100 pilgrims during the crowded spring season. There were cheaper rooms for peasants and their families and some elegant suites and special courtyards reserved for the more important guests. Yuan chose a room in the northeastern corner for its quiet and seclusion. The tall trees at the back cast a cool green light over the court, while a covered corridor in front, with its many hexagonal windows, afforded glimpses of the great river and the mountains beyond. The room and the furniture were simple but comfortable. Yuan was delighted, and with the few volumes of poetry which he always kept in his light luggage, he felt comfortably settled for a short and delightful vacation. "You are romantic to choose a place like this," said Yang. "Romantic about what?" "The moon, the flowers, the snow, and the wind-swept hills. This is an ideal place for romance." "Don't be silly. If I wanted to seek pleasures, I would go to the capital." "No, I am going to be a monk and bury myself in books for a few weeks here." Yang knew that his friend was highly temperamental, sensitive and self-willed, and he let him have his way. He had not been there a day before he discovered that on the west adjoining the temple wall there was a villa of some rich family with a big orchard of flower and fruit trees at the back, which he could see from his back window. The dark tiled roofs, partly hidden by an apricot tree stretching across the wall, revealed a spacious building of several courtyards. He found out from the servant that the villa was part of the temple property and was occupied by a family by the name of Tsui. The father of the family, who was now dead, had been a patron of the temple and a great friend of the abbot, and used to come and live there whenever he wanted to get away from the city. After the father died, the family came to live there permanently because the widow, Mrs. Tsui, was a timid woman and said she felt safe there. The abbot permitted them to do so, partly because of their personal friendship and partly because the villa had been built by a large donation from the deceased father. On the third night, the young man heard the sound of distant music, sweet and sad and low, played on a 7-stringed instrument. Heard in the silence of the night at a monastery, it was strangely exciting. The next morning, his curiosity aroused, he walked around the temple grounds and found that there was a wall enclosing the villa, so that he could not see much of the inside. A stream ran along the front of the house, which was set farther back than the temple, and the gate was reached by a charming red-painted bridge. The door was closed, but there was a sign of mourning in the form of a diagonal cross of white paper, old and torn, pasted over the red circle of the gate. A separate path ran for about 50 yards down and joined the main road at the temple outer gate. The air was fragrant with the many plum flowers in full bloom, and a small stream ran from the inside garden through an opening in the wall and fell into the stream in front with the sound of frolicking children. Yuan was fascinated. He kept thinking of the family which lived in such beautiful seclusion, and the player of the sweet melody he had heard the night before, who had never allowed herself to be seen. On coming back, he realized that the part adjoining his court was the back of the house. He would not have paid more attention to his unknown neighbour had not something happened in the second week of his arrival. There was rumour of looting and riots in the city. General Hun Chan had died, and the ill-disciplined soldiery had taken the occasion of the funeral to stage a riot. They looted the shops and carried away women from people's homes. The next morning, things seemed to get worse. Some of the soldiers, having looted the city, came toward the river. The village nearby was full of footloose, ragged troops. Just before noon, when he was sitting in a rattan chair with his feet upon a table and a volume of Meng Haojian on his lap, he heard feminine voices and hurrying steps passing the corridor in front. He went out to see what had happened. He was the more surprised because his room was at the end of the passage. There was a door which was usually locked and which he had not noticed before. The door was now open, and a middle-aged woman, about 40, and 2 girls were hurrying along the winding corridor toward the main temple rooms as fast as their feet could carry them. The woman, richly dressed, walked in front, while the daughter, who was about 17 or 18, and a maid followed behind. The daughter wore a simple old dark blue dress, and her hair was down, gathered at the back with a large clasp. He was sure that it was she who played the music. The precipitate manner of the women showed that they were in fear of some trouble. Rather enjoying the excitement and attracted by the sight of the young girlish figure, Yuan hurried forward and followed them. There was a hubbub among the monks and the servants. A woman whose husband had been killed defending his daughter was weeping and telling her story. The young girl, careless of others looking on, stood by and listened attentively. She had a mass of beautiful black hair, a white neck, an unusually small mouth, and her face was slender and small. Her mother looked terribly anxious and worried, evidently afraid that the soldiers might come to their house, for it was believed that they were wealthy. The abbot came out and told them that in case of emergency, he would provide a safe hiding place for them. The rabble soldiers, out for loot mainly, would not dare to desecrate the temple. "Mother, I won't worry," said the daughter in a calm, chirping, girlish voice. "We must stay in the house. It will invite robbery to abandon it. Time enough, when necessary, to escape through the back door and run into the temple." The morning sun cast a white light over her pointed nose and high forehead, which was the only thing unfeminine about her, if it is true that brains and good looks should not go together in a woman. The mother listened to her advice. She seemed to rely a good deal on her daughter's judgment. Being young and cavalierly willing to help a young girl, Yuan went up to the abbot and said with a correct and decorous countenance, not looking at the girl, that under the circumstances it would be wise to take all precautionary measures for the lady's protection. He said he had a friend who knew the regional commander well and who would be willing to go and ask for the commander's protection. All they would need would be 6 well-armed guards stationed outside the house. "That is sensible," said the girl, directing a pleading look at him. The mother asked the young man's name, and Yuan introduced himself. Delighted at the chance to know the family, Yuan said he would call on his friend Yang immediately. In the evening he came back with 6 soldiers and a formal notice signed by the regional commander warning the rabble off the Tsui house. As a matter of fact, the sight of the red vests of these guards was enough to deter any straggling ragamuffins from venturing into the villa. Happy with his success, Yuan hoped to win a smile of gratitude from the charming young lady who had looked at him so pleadingly that morning. He went expectantly into an elegantly furnished parlour, but only the mother came out to see him. She said many pleasant things in appreciation of the trouble he had taken, and Yuan thought that being able to secure such official influence must have raised him in the mother's regard, but he could not obtain another glimpse of the girl, and he returned to the temple, disappointed. In a few days, the regional commander's own army arrived. Order was restored to the city, and the guards were withdrawn. Mrs. Tsui invited Yuan to dinner in the central parlour, which gave the occasion an atmosphere of great formality. I just had a spirit say it's pronounced Tsui. They might be right, what do I know? But anyway, Honestly, I'm never alone. I'm never alone. I get lonely, but I'm never technically alone because I've got these guys. They seem to like it when I read to you stories on YouTube and hang around. It's a bit kind of odd. Anyway, I wish to thank you for all that you have done for us, said the mother, and I want to introduce you properly to my family. She called to a boy about 12 whose name was Huan Lang, Joy, and bade him don't. You have to laugh. And bade him make his formal bow to his elder brother. He is my only son, said Mrs. Sway with a big smile, and then she called, Jing, come out and thank the gentleman who has saved our lives. And Spirit just went like this. Okay, they're having fun with me again. Oh my goodness, I'm so tired. The girl was long in coming out. Yuan thought that she was shy because this was to be a formal introduction, and girls of high families would hardly think of sitting at the same table with a strange young man. The mother called again impatiently and repeatedly, Jing, I am asking you to come out. Mr. Yuan has saved your life and your mother's life. Is this the time to follow conventions? The daughter came out at last and made her bow, shyly yet proudly. She wore a simple, tight-fitting dress with a neat but modest make-up. Like a well-educated girl of a highly born family, she took a seat next to her mother silently, giving Yuan the distinct impression that seeing her at all was a rare privilege. According to custom, Yuan asked her mother, How old is your daughter? She was born under the present emperor in the year Chastity. She is 17. Though this was a home dinner and Yuan was the only guest, the daughter was perhaps overconscious of the young man's presence. She maintained a correct and distant manner throughout the whole dinner. Yuan tried several times to guide the conversation to familiar topics, her deceased father and her younger brother's studies. But he could not draw her into conversation. Any ordinary girl, even the most virtuous and least coquettish, would look and feel differently in a young man's presence, and her face and manner would show it. But this charming girl was a riddle to him, like a sphinx or a fairy princess who could not be touched by ordinary human emotions. Was she completely rigid and virtuous, which Yuan could not believe, or was that cold exterior a mask for deep passions within? Or was it an extra reserve adopted by girls brought up in the severe Confucian training? In the course of the dinner, Yuan learned that the widow's maiden name was Cheng, the same as his own mother's, and being of the same clan branch, she was in fact an aunt by relationship. The mother was visibly elated at the discovery, and she proposed a toast to the clan nephew. Only then did the daughter's face soften into a suggestion of a smile. Yuan was both piqued and attracted by the girl's attitude. He had never yet met a girl who was so proud and reserved and so difficult to approach. The more he fought against his feelings, the more he was fascinated by her and desired her. He tried every excuse to call on the family, first to pay his return call and then to talk with the younger brother. He made his presence felt in the family, and Injing must certainly have seen him, for girls of rich families observed and heard a great deal from behind the latticed partitions. But she was as shy as a deer at the approach of a beast of prey. Once he saw her playing in the twilight with her younger brother in the back garden, but upon seeing him, she darted off and disappeared. "Oriole, Oriole," he cried. What an elusive Oriole. Sorry, I have to laugh. I won't tell you why that's hilarious, but I have to laugh. One day, just let me get it together. One day he chanced upon the maid alone on the path leading from the house to the outer gate. The maid, whose name was Rose, Hung Niang, was a simple, direct girl, pretty and attractive in her own way, and wise in the ways of the world. Yuan took the opportunity to inquire after her young mistress. His face was crimson, and Rose smiled a knowing smile. "Tell me, is your mistress engaged?" "No. Why do you ask?" "Well, we are cousins, and I am interested to know more about her. We have been introduced, as you know, but I have never had a chance to talk with her. I should be so happy to have such an opportunity." Rose was silent and merely looked at him. "Tell me, why does she avoid me?" "How do I know?" "She seems such a wonderful girl, so refined and well behaved. I admire her greatly," Yuan said at last. "Oh, I see. Why don't you ask to see her through the mother?" "You do not understand. She hardly says a word when her mother is around. Is there any chance of my seeing her alone? Since seeing her, I have not been able to think of anything else." "I see what you mean," said the maid. She covered her mouth in laughter and started to run away. "Rose, Rose," he called after her. When she stopped, he said, "Rose, I beg you, you must help me." The maid looked at him steadily and said sympathetically, "I would not dare to bring such a message. She is very stern and proper. She has never spoken to a young man. Mr. Yuan, you are a gentleman, and you have done a service to the family. I like you. I will tell you a secret. She reads and writes poems, and often sits before her books, lost in thought. You may write a poem to her. That will be the only way to open her heart to you, if there is any way at all. And you'd better thank me for the advice." She winked at him coquettishly. The next day, Yuan sent a poem through the maid. Green light suffuses the silent, deep courtyard. The twittering oriole is silent too, hidden in the shade. The shut-out lover sees only flower petals floating out with the garden stream and feels lost. I watch the declining moon at dawn, my soul lost in thought of thy lovely face, and trembled with the fainting hope of a kindly gesture, a gracious smile. That evening, Rose brought back a poem by Injing, which was entitled full moon night. Someone waits in the moonlit night, in the western moon, with the door ajar. Across the wall, the flower shadows move. Ah, perhaps my love has come. That was February the 14th. Yuan was overjoyed. 'Twas a clear invitation to a secret rendezvous. An appointment by night was more than he had hoped for. On the 16th, he followed the hint in the poem and climbed over the wall by the apricot tree and peeped inside. He found indeed that the door of the western room was left open. He climbed down and went into the room. Rose was sleeping in the bed and he waked her. The maid was surprised. "Why do you come here? What do you want?" she asked. "She asked me to come," Yuan explained. "Please go and tell her that I am here." Soon Rose came back and whispered to him, "She is coming." Yuan waited 10 minutes in unbearable suspense. When Jing appeared, there was a mixture of excitement and confusion in her face, but her deep black eyes were veiled in mystery. The momentary wave of bashfulness passed, and she said rather stiffly, "I have asked you to come, Mr. Yuan, because you said you wanted to see me. I am grateful for what you have done to protect my mother and our family, and I want to thank you personally. I am glad that we are cousins, but I am surprised that you sent such a love poem through the maid. I could not and would not expose it to my mother, for it would be unfair to you, and I thought I had better personally see you to ask you to stop this." She paused in confusion. It sounded very much like a rehearsed speech. Yuan was aghast. "But, Miss Sui, I was only asking to have a talk with you." They just said, "Good girl." "And I came because of that poem you sent me." "Yes, I invited you," she replied resolutely. "I took the risk and I did it gladly. But you could be wrong to think I'm making an appointment for anything improper. Do not misunderstand." Her voice shook with suppressed emotion. She turned and left hurriedly. The disappointment and shame made Yuan angry. He could not believe it, could not understand it. Why should she write that obviously suggestive poem instead of sending a simple reply through the maid and then take the trouble to come and lecture him? Or had she changed her mind only, at the last moment, afraid of what she was about to do? What womanly caprice! He could not understand women. Now she appeared to him more like a marble-cold princess than ever. His love almost turned into hatred because he thought she was making fun of him. 2 nights later, Yuan was asleep in his bed when he felt someone shaking him in the dark. He sat up and lighted the lamp. Rose was standing before him. "Get up, she is coming," she whispered, and left the room. Yuan sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, not quite sure that he was awake. Quickly he threw a robe around himself and sat up and waited. Soon the maid brought Jin into the room. The girl's face was flushed, shy, uncertain, and she looked as though she was leaning on her maid for support. All her pride and haughty self-control was gone. She did not apologize nor explain. Her hair was let down over her shoulders, and she looked at him with a deep, dark look in her wonderful eyes. No explanation was necessary. Yuan's heart palpitated. This sudden surrender of herself, of her own free will, in his room was even more surprising than her cold repudiation of him on the previous occasion. But all his anger had dissolved at the sight of the girl he loved. The maid had brought a pillow, and quickly depositing it on the bed, she withdrew. The first thing the girl did was put the light out, still without uttering a word. Yuan walked up to her, and feeling the warmth of her body close to his, he took her in his arms. Just as quickly, the girl's lips found his, and he felt a quiver go over her whole body and heard her quick intake of breath. Again, without a word, she sank softly on the bed in a natural gesture, as if her legs were too weak to support her. Too soon he heard the matin bells of the temple. Dawn was breaking, and Rose came to urge her mistress to leave, and Jane got up and dressed in the pale light of the dawn. After adjusting her hair roughly with her hand, she left with the maid, a languorous expression on her face. The door closed without a sound. She had not spoken all night. He had done all the talking, and when he spoke of his adoration for her, she answered only with sighs and the warm, wet pressure of her lips. Yuan sat up suddenly and wondered if it had not all happened in a dream, but her strong perfume still lingered in his room, and he saw the rouge marks on the towel. Yes, it was real. The sphinx-like girl, who had seemed so aloof and impassive, had given way to a passion beyond her self-control. Was it passion, or was it love? She had come to him shamelessly. He remembered the intense emphasis with which she had said previously, "You would be wrong to think I'm making an appointment for anything improper. Do not misunderstand." What did she mean by that? 'Twas enough that she had come. He had not believed it possible only the day before. He had never known such happiness. He was transported into a new world with unknown frontiers of beauty and delirious happiness before him. He waited hourly for the coming night when, like a luminous pearl or warm glowing jade, she would again transform his humble room into heaven by the magic of her love. She had made no sign that she would come again the following night. It is entirely believable that the girl had decided to come to him in a moment of passion. It is also possible that, after the first night, she wanted to take time to think over the romance which she had so rashly begun. Yuan stopped trying to figure out women. Night after night he waited, with the blood pounding in his veins, hoping for another visit from the fairy princess. Was this suspense another caprice of the girl, Had she come to him merely to satisfy her whim and desire? He sat alone in his room every night. He had bought coils of incense in preparation for her visit, and he watched the cold cinders fall silently into the container. He tried to take his mind off what seemed to be in vain, hopeless waiting by reading a light romance, for he could not read anything serious, prepared to sit up at the slightest noise of footsteps or the faintest creak of the door. Once he went to test the passage door like a thief, but it was firmly locked. During the first few days, he avoided going to her home, for having had a secret meeting with her, he thought it would be wise to show himself in the house as little as possible. After the third day, however, he could not stand it any longer, and he called on the mother. She was as cordial as usual and asked him to stay for lunch. And Jing came to the table, again with that cold, correct look on her face, which would not betray their intimacy by so much as a gesture. He waited for a sign, but the girl was a master in the art of deception. When he looked boldly at her, her eyelids did not even flicker. He thought that perhaps her mother's suspicion had been aroused and she was being extra careful. There had to be some reason for his silence. 2 weeks passed uneventfully. He did not mention the affair to Yang, and when his friend asked him to stay overnight, he always insisted on returning to the temple for fear of missing her visit. He could not tear himself away from the place. He composed a poem of 60 lines, recording his strange experience of meeting a fairy and telling of the heights of his ecstasy and the depths of his longing. And the seas were wide and the clouds were high, and the fairy did not return. One evening, past midnight, as if in answer to his prayer, he heard the passage door creak. Quickly, he rushed to open it and found Rose standing there. She confided to him that her young mistress had had a key made for the lock so they could meet in the western room. She had arranged it so that the padlock would appear to be in place, but he could push it open and reach the western room by a short passage. Even in his delirium, Yuan was impressed with the cunning and audacity of his lover's meticulous plans for their meeting. After that, Jing came to meet him in the western room every other night, or as often as she could get away, and she always sent a message through the maid when she could not. She nearly always came after midnight and returned to her room before dawn. Yuan was deliriously happy. The girl opened her heart to him, loved him passionately, and they pledged to be true to one another no matter what happened. It was difficult to believe that there was so much love in her small body. Jing had a mature mind and was interested in all that he was doing or planning to do. They lay together in the dark and talked in whispers, for there was the danger of discovery, even though Yuan's ears were always on the alert. On the other hand, she never showed the slightest regret for what she had done. The only explanation for her conduct when he asked her was a passionate kiss and a murmur, I cannot help it. I love you so. What if your mother finds out? He asked her once. Then she will have to make you her son-in-law, replied Jing with a smile. Her nerves were as good as her brains. I will speak to your mother when the time comes, Yuan said, and Jing did not press the question further. The time of parting had to come. Yuan told Jing that he must leave for the capital. Jing was not surprised, but remarked calmly, Go if you must, but the capital is only a few days' journey from here. You will come back in the summer. I want you to. She was so sure of herself. The night before his departure, he was fully prepared for their usual rendezvous, but for some reason, Jing did not come. He returned in late summer for a short visit just before the autumn imperial examinations. There was no indications that Jing's mother knew about the affair. She was as cordial as usual and invited him to stay at their house. Perhaps she had an idea that she might marry her daughter to him. Yuan was pleased with the idea of seeing Jing in the daytime. They had a wonderful week together. She had lost her shyness before him, and sometimes he could see her playing with her younger brother, tying blades of grass into a boat to sail down a small stream in their back garden. He was very happy about their secret love. Yuan's happiness did not escape Yang. When Yang came to visit his friend at Jing's home, he sensed the situation without being told. What is going on here, Wei Qi? Yang remarked, calling him by his courtesy name, and Yuan smiled. The mother saw it too. The day before Yuan left, she asked Jing about the young man, and the girl said with a wholehearted confidence, He will come back. He has to go and take the national examinations. That evening, they had an opportunity to be alone. Yuan looked miserable and sad, sighing at her side, but Jing had full confidence in his love. There was another side to her character. The girl who trembled in his embrace was clear-headed and unsentimental in a crisis. She did not utter useless words. Calmly she said to him, Do not look as if this were goodbye forever. I shall be waiting. The mother gave Yuan a farewell dinner, and after supper he asked Jing to play the qin for him. He had once chanced to find her playing the music alone, but when she discovered that he was listening, she had stopped and refused to continue, in spite of his pleading. That night, however, she consented. Seated before the instrument, with her curls hanging over her bent head, she struck notes slowly and pensively, the prelude to the Cloud Cape dance. Yuan sat entranced, absorbed in the beautiful player and her exquisite melody. Suddenly she lost control and broke off and dashed inside. Her mother called her, but she did not come out again. The lovers only saw each other once more. Yuan failed at the examinations. Perhaps, what's happened to this? Perhaps he was too ashamed of himself to come back and ask for her hand, but she was waiting for him, and there was nothing to prevent him from paying her a visit. At first he sent her letters, then the intervals between them became greater. The capital was only a few days away, but Jing could always find reasons for his delay, and she never gave up hope. At this time, Yang came to see Jing and her mother rather frequently. The mother spoke to Yang about Yuan, for he was an older man and married, and she showed him Yuan's letters. Yang knew something was wrong. He had an idea that his friend was leading a new life in the capital, for Xi'an was full of distractions. He sent Yuan a letter, and the reply only increased his worries. The girl persuaded her mother to put the best complexion upon the matter and assured her that he was hiding until he passed the examinations the following autumn. Then he would surely come. Spring had come round and winter was approaching. One day, Jing received a poem from Yuan, phrased in the most equivocal language. He spoke of their past happiness and his longing for her, yet the meaning between the lines was clear. It was a poem of farewell. He sent her some gifts and spoke of his torture in their year-long separation, comparing it to that of the cowherd and the spinning maid in heaven who were permitted to meet across the Milky Way only once a year. But, he went on, alas, in this year-long separation, who knows what may happen on the other side of the Milky Way? My future course is as uncertain as that of the clouds, and how can I be sure that you will be as pure as snow? When a peach flower blooms in spring, who is to prevent admirers from plucking its rosy petals? I am happy that I was the first to receive your favour, but who will be the lucky one to take the prize? Ah, a year to wait, and how long will it seem before another year is out? Rather than endure this endless waiting, would it not be better to part forever? Read carefully, what the poem implied was utter nonsense. It was an outright, unjustifiable insult on the girl's character. When Yang saw Jing with the letter lying in her hand, her eyes were swollen. Yuan must have gone out of his mind, or he was simply trying to extricate himself from the situation. What was there to prevent him from coming to see her if he loved her? And he did not have to impute to her what he was guilty of himself. Yang made up his mind. Miss Wei, I'm going to Xi'an on some business. I shall look him up and shall be glad to take a letter for you. And Jing looked at him. Will you? She asked calmly. Yang was surprised by the matter-of-fact tone in which she said it. And don't worry about me. I am all right, she added. Tell him I am all right. Yang went back and packed up for the trip to Xi'an, which he had really undertaken for the girl's sake. He would like to find out what was happening and perhaps give Yuan a piece of his mind. As a man of honour, Yuan should have married her, though Jing was the last girl to demand it of him. He would have liked to bring Yuan back if it were possible. 3 days later, he set out for the capital. He brought with him a letter from Jing, which he gave to Yuan. It was as sincere and to the point as it was dignified in her self-defence. I am delighted to receive your last letter and touched by your loving remembrance. I am excited and happy to receive the box of hair ornaments and the 5 inches of rouge. I appreciate these thoughtful gifts, but of what use would they be to me in your absence? They bring you closer to me and only increase my longing to see you. I am glad that you are well and able to pursue your studies at the capital, and I am only sorry for myself shut up in this small town. There is no use grieving about fate. I am prepared to take what is in store for me. I miss you so much since your departure in autumn. I try to appear happy and gay when there is company, but when I am alone, I cannot restrain my tears. I have dreamed often of you, and we are so happy together like old times. And then I wake up, clinging to the half-warm quilt with a sense of desolation. I feel you are so far away from me. A year has passed since you were gone. I am grateful beyond words that in a gay city like Chang'an, you have not forgotten your old sweetheart entirely. But I shall always be true to our promise. We were formally introduced by my mother, but under the circumstances, I lost my self-control and completely surrendered myself to you. You know that after our first night together, I swore I would never love anyone but you, and we would be true to each other for life. That was my hope and our promise to each other. If you keep your promise, all is well, and I shall be the happiest woman in the world. But if you discard the old for the new and think of our love as a casual affair, I shall love you still, but shall go down to my grave with an eternal regret. It is all up to you, and I have nothing further to say. Take good care of yourself, please. I'm sending you a jade ring which I wore in my childhood, hoping it will serve as a souvenir of our love. Jade is a symbol of integrity, and the circle of the ring signifies continuity. I'm also sending a strand of silk threads and a tear-stained bamboo tea roller. These are simple things, but they carry the hope that your love will be as spotless as jade and as continuous as the ring. The tear stains on the bamboo and the skein of threads will be reminders of my love and my tangled feelings for you. My heart is near you, but my body is far away. If thinking would help, I would be hourly by your side. This letter carries with it my ardent longing and my desperate hope that we shall meet again. Take good care of yourself, eat well, and don't worry about me. Well? Yang watched his friend's face turn from red to white while reading the letter. After a pause, Yang said, "Why don't you come and see her?" Yuan stammered some excuse about his studies and his being unhappy with himself. Yang saw through it all. "You are not doing right by her," declared Yang. "Tell me, what is the matter?" "I'm not ready to marry. I have my scholastic career to attend to. It is true, I had an affair with her. She came to me. I do not think that a youthful folly should interfere with my career." Youthful folly? Yes. Don't you think that when a young man has done something he should not have done, the only thing to do is to end it? Yang was angry. It may be a youthful folly to you, but what about the girl who writes you that letter? Yuan's face showed great embarrassment. A young man can make mistakes, can't he? And he shouldn't waste his time with women. He should. Wei Chi, said Yang. If you have changed your mind, don't try to moralize about it. Let me tell you what I think. I think you are the most moralistic and the most selfish person I have known. Yang was convinced his friend was not being honest with him, but that there was some other reason. He stayed at the capital for about a week and had time to learn what Yuan was doing. He was having an affair with a Miss Wei of a very rich family. In utter disgust, Yang returned to Pucheng. He had a difficult job in breaking the news to the girl. He was afraid it would hurt her terribly. He told the mother first. Well, asked Jing when she saw him, have you brought a letter for me? Yang remained silent. He couldn't say it, and while he was trying to find words, he saw the girl's countenance change. In that moment, he saw the deep, dark eyes of Jing become bright and penetrating, like those of a woman who understands not only her situation, but all life and eternity, or like one who has been forsaken not by one lover, but by 10. Her eyes burned, and Yang instinctively lowered his ashes. Well, he said finally, that poem he sent you was a poem of farewell. And Jing stood there motionless and speechless for a full 5 seconds. Yang was afraid she was going to collapse, but something proud and hard was in her words as she said, "So be it." She turned abruptly to leave the room. Just as she reached the chamber door, Yang heard her hysterical laughter. Her mother rushed after her, and for 5 minutes Yang could still hear that laughter inside. Yang was greatly worried, but the next day he found out from the mother, to his great relief, that the girl was all right, that she had been proud and silent as a queen after the moments of hysteria. She had given her consent to marriage with a cousin of her mother's family by the name of Cheng, who had been soliciting the match for some time. The following spring, Zheng and Cheng were married. One day, Yuan came to her home and asked to see her as a distant cousin. And Zheng refused to see him, but as Yuan was preparing to go, she stepped out from behind the screen. "Why do you come to bother me? I waited for you, and you did not return. There is nothing to be said between us. I have got over it, and you should too. Go away." Yuan left without a word, and Jing collapsed on the floor in a heap. The end. Well, thus concludes tonight's reading. Oh my goodness, I'm so tired. Why am I doing this, people of Earth? It's a substitute for something. I don't know what. I don't know what's a substitute for. But that was very interesting. I rather enjoyed that, living vicariously through other people instead of worried about my own sorrows, as they say in Yiddish. Anyway, it's 9:43 p.m. I think I might retire for the night. So I hope you enjoyed those 2 stories as much as I did. And I'll be back tomorrow with, tomorrow is the 2nd of October. 3 more days of my reading of my journal entries, People of Earth. That will be a completion. Might even buy a bottle of cheap wine to celebrate. Oh, wait a minute, in 3 days. What day is it today? Tuesday. Oh, well, in 3 days I'll be out dancing. So I might have a drinky poos to celebrate the end of all my reading of my journal entries. And I'll have to think of more interesting and exciting stories to read to you. And start creating my own love stories, baby girls and baby boys. Can I do it at this late stage of my life? Could be like the widow in the first story. I'm not going to kill any chickens or lure any gardeners, just saying. You know how I feel about lawn mowing men that get too frisky with me. Like, not my lovely Muslim lawn mowing man, he's a gentleman, but the one before had to be fired. He was so fucking creepy. So that will never happen, people of Earth. But anyway, there you go. I'm like the grass widow because I'm not a widow, but a very, very gay, long-standing divorcee of almost 30 years duration. Oh, you ready? Smallest violin. I mean, you have to laugh. But anyway, on that note, good night, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are in the space-time continuum, and stay happy, maintain the wild, and only invite truest, deepest, most authentic lovers into your heart, mind, body, and soul complex. Says she who's obviously not capable of doing that. But anyway, bing, bang, boom, babies. The dance will continue because I'm cheeky like that and I love dancing. Anyway, good night. Good night to you all. Have a wonderful night. Bye for now.